It's an interesting thing as we're walking through here because there are so many plants that we could talk about. I mean, we could, like Mark was saying earlier, we could literally talk for the entire time that we have right here in this area. And I want to make sure that you all get a chance to harvest stuff. Like, who here wants to harvest stuff today? Yeah, definitely.
While we're getting set up, I will say we're seeing a ton, obviously, now of yellow dock and burdock. And at the same time, I'm not sure how many of you are outfitted for the harvesting of it because these roots aren't roots that you can typically just pull out really easily from the ground. So these tools, as you can see, we're both got these. They're called hories, and this is like an excellent root digging tool. So if any of you do have one of these handy and you want to dig any of this yellow dock or burdock as we're walking along, certainly feel free.
And if anyone wants to use my horie, you are welcome to. Anybody?
Yeah, and likewise.
So this is something, it's not per se a wild food, but it's something that a lot of us will find pretty frequently, especially in our gardens. Has anyone ever eaten this before? It is a winter pea. And so a lot of people grow it as cover crop and they don't know that it's edible. And this is actually going to be probably a little good chunk of our salad. Why would one grow this as a cover crop? Nitrogen, because what family is it in? Legume. It's in the pea family. And so this is a pea that we're actually going to eat the entire body of. It's really good when it's young and tender like this. When it gets a little older, it's not so great. It is awesome to mix in with wild salads. Like, it is totally awesome to make wild salads that are super duper dense. And this adds to a lot of the flavor. Because what flavor does this have? It's sweet. Wouldn't that be awesome in salad? Especially mixed with like a few things like yellow dock leaves. I like to have a sweet base. So winter pea is something I like to use a lot of. And I think that there's another thing that, look what she has. Does anyone know what this is?
Dead nettle.
Dead nettle. And I recently learned a new name for it called purple pagoda. Which is so sweet.
That's funny, because I just recently started a new name for that one, which is purple archangel.
Ah.
In Europe, they call it archangel, that genus.
Nice.
That's
awesome. So what family is this in? Does anyone know? It has a square stem. Look at the flower shape. Yes, it is a mint. It's a lamium. So this is a plant that, who has seen this growing in their garden before? It is an incredibly aggressive garden weed, and it was my nemesis in my garden for several years. And it's something that I have never really been into eating because it's fuzzy, and I like to eat things that I don't necessarily have to cook. But it's one that when you cook it, it's really awesome. And my cold frame kind of bit the dust this winter because I went to Florida, and so all my kale died. And so I was left to eat dead nettle. And I came to really enjoy it this winter and cut it up in my eggs every morning. It's pretty awesome. Is there anything you want to say about dead nettle?
Yeah, I guess definitely cooking more ideal, but you could put it into a pesto, probably more mixed with other things. In general, I tend to mix it with other things than just to eat it by itself. It is related to something that it is also sometimes confused with, which is henbit. I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So these are just different species of the same genus, but both edible. But to expand out beyond, once again, the species and genus level, this family is probably the #1 family to know because, for one, it's very easy to identify, and two, there's just a multitude of uses. There's a ton of it, but it's a very safe family. There's probably easily about 100 different ones out of that 2,400, probably even more than 100 different ones around here. They're all edible. So just even getting to that family level is enough in this case. And the square stem is a big thing, tied with aroma. There are a few other families around here that have square stems as well. Yeah, it can spread that way. I believe so, like other mint things.
In my driveway.
And something I must say is, since I've started using the dead nettle and appreciating the gift it has to offer me, it has become a much less pernicious weed in my garden. And so this is something like the energetics of gardening and weeds. Who here is a gardener? Yeah. So So y'all are interested in some gardening talk, even though this is wild food. So one thing that's really interesting with the energetics of gardening is it's just so rich. And I sometimes poo-poo the woo-woo, but I really think that there's a lot to what intentions you're giving a plant. And sometimes the plants are there to teach you a lesson. And so I think that this would be an awesome time to take like 1 minute for y'all to really get your hands on harvesting some of this winter pea and maybe some of this lamium too. And I always like having some of the bags during the gardening walk to be raw green bags for salads, some of them to be cooked green bags, and some of them to be tea bags. And that way we don't have to sort it all out once we get to the kitchen. So let's all spend a minute picking some Austrian winter peas. Notice that I don't pull the whole thing up, I just pluck it. And that way I don't get dirt on the green, and I also just get the tender bits. And that's what we really want, is the tender bits, because that's what's tasty.
And with the tea, we're going to have 2 teas, right? We're going to have more of like a mint-based tea with a few other things mixed in, and then we're going to do this detox root tea with the yellow dock and the burdock and maybe some dandelion roots. So if you want to like separate those two, because the roots obviously are pretty dirty and we don't want to get them on the foliage of the other.
We don't like it dirty. So who has a tea bag? And then some of these, a few of these yellow dock leaves can go in the salad bags too. And I really encourage y'all to just take the top couple inches off of the winter pea, and that'll make it so that it can continue to grow. And it also makes it so it's so much tastier, because this little tender bit that I can just like break with my fingernail, no problem, is awesome to eat. Whereas the stuff lower down, is that very tasty? No, it's tough. So let's just get the tender bits.
I guess, basically, yeah. But then they'll come back in the fall too. But to be honest, I eat them at any point in time. And it just depends on your palate. Like, if you like them, then eat them. You know, it's not like
And something I want to mention is when I'm at home and I'm wanting to gather large quantities of winter pea out of my garden, or chickweed, which we'll probably see soon, I use my knife. And so like I have beds at home that are all Austrian winter pea, or beds that are all chickweed in my garden. Did you hear that? Weed, a bed full of weeds in the garden. And I just cut it like this. And I can harvest a gallon of greens like pretty darn quickly when I'm cutting. And what that does too is it allows the plant to regenerate, and also tells especially chickweed not to go to flower yet, but keep making luscious greens for me to eat, because I really want the season to go longer. So.
Yeah, shall we get into this one? So we got our next contestant on Name That Plant, and this is another one that sure a lot of people are going to be familiar with, but there's a couple things to learn about this to point out. In particular, because there are some lookalikes, and in this case, there are some deadly poisonous potential lookalikes. So you really want to be able to make that distinction. So this is the plant that we're talking about, which is wild onion, right? Or field garlic. Some people call it onion grass. I tend to stay away from that because it kind of confuses what family it's in. And traditionally, the onions have been given their own family. So anything you can think of that's oniony, like garlic or shallots or leeks or scallions, chives, they're actually all in the same genus, the Allium genus, and just different species. All right, and so this one's probably Allium vineale, and it does have a little garlic-like bulb down in the bottom here, and everything's edible. And how I would normally harvest this out in the field is that I would go ahead and take this little sheath and just pull that down, right? So it's nice and clean, you're not getting dirt in your bag, and then take the edge of the knife and just cut those roots off, and then you're like good to go, right? And every single part is edible. There's just one difference that makes a difference in this case, like so many things, and that is if it smells like an onion, it's an onion, right? So there are quite a few things that will look like this, but none of the poisonous ones are going to smell like onions. Okay, so that is the clear distinction that you want to make. And in particular, there's another famous member of the onion family that's coming out right now, up deep in the woods, right? Which one am I talking about? Ramps, right? So there are some poisonous lookalikes that look like ramps as well. And ramps, of course, the leaf is wide, which is fairly unusual for this family. right? And there are some other things that have those wide leaves that are fairly closely related that are poisonous. So you'd still want to make sure you get that onion smell. Another thing is, whereas this is something that's super prolific, grows everywhere, ramps only grow in really special places at a certain elevation, very largely in demand. There is a risk of losing them, right? So a big piece that I'd like to point out, and Natalie spoke to this already a little bit too, as far as like focusing on these things that are super prolific, running over the space, you know, like the things we talked about already with the yellow dock and the burdock and the purple lamium. And this one, with the things that are out in the woods, we really have a due diligence as far as making sure that we can maintain their health and well-being. And some people will say, you know, pick every 5th one or pick every 10th one. And I don't think those numbers are quite set across the board with the things growing in the woods. I think it's clear with the ramps that we need to do more than just pick a certain small part of the patch. Like, there are seeds available through United Plant Savers. I'd like to mention them, who are very dedicated towards the conservation of threatened plants. And also, if you find ramps in the market and they've got the bottom on it and some root like this, you could try to actually separate that bottom and replant that, and sometimes they'll grow back because they're perennials. So that's another thing we can do conservation-wise in regards to the ramps.
Are we going to see a ram today?
It's kind of doubtful, probably, because they're going to typically be more like 3,000 foot elevation, so like up the mountainside, probably higher than what's around here in Mills River.
A friend brought 20 pounds ramps from Cherokee
Wow.
on Wednesday. There might still be some at the co-op. Brought them there
Oh, cool.
in Nashville.
So it's interesting with ramps and sensitive plants. I think that what Marc is saying is really awesome, and I think also we have our gifts we can offer. Like, what do plants need to stay green? Anyone know?
Water.
Water. What else?
Sunlight.
Sun. What else?
Water.
What especially for green? What fertilizer for green?
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen. And what do our bodies make when we pee? Nitrogen. And so if you are out in the woods harvesting ramps and you want to really give a gift to that patch to keep them going, what do you think you might do? And so that's something I'd really suggest. And also, I think paying attention to the way that different plants grow is really important. Like, ramps kind of grow like garlic. Like, they make seeds, garlic not so much, but they make seeds, but they also grow by division. Like, you know how you plant one garlic clove and it makes a whole head? So ramps also grow that way. And so do you think it's good to take all of the ramps in a given area? No, you probably want to take care, be like a wild animal. If you're in the wildlands, if you're in the forest, be like a wild animal. Takes a little bit here, move on. Take a little bit there, move on. Whereas if you are in the field and you're digging wild onions or chickweed or something like that, do you think you need to be real conservative about what you're taking? No. So that said, I think there's one other plant I'd like to look at.
Super.
So this is one of my favorite greens. Does anyone know what this plant is here that's just starting to go to flower?
This is the plant we're talking about. And especially if you don't know it, feel free to come up and get a piece, and I could pass them around too. But definitely using all your senses. I learned this concept from my friends Chad and Robin that botany is a contact sport. Right? So, you know, it's one thing to intellectualize about this and listen to what we're saying and think about with your mind, but it's a whole nother thing to feel the touch of this plant and to smell it and even take a little nibble right here in the field and use all of your senses. That's really going to seep the information a lot deeper than just kind of thinking about what we're saying.
So what do you all notice about this plant when you look at it? How are the leaves? Do the leaves come out opposite each other?
They do.
Or do they come out alternately? Opposite, yes. So that's a really important thing to notice when you're identifying plants, whether the leaves are coming out alternate, opposite, or if they're coming up all at the bottom like a basal rosette. So the leaves are coming out opposite. And then what do you notice when you look on the stem? A line of hairs, yes indeed. And what happens when that line of hairs gets to a leaf juncture? It switches, isn't that crazy? So this is, the line of hairs is something that's distinctive about the pink family, of which this is a member. And so chickweed, we will be making a salad that is primarily chickweed. It's something that is very abundant both in the spring and in the fall. It likes a little bit of cooler weather, and right now chickweed all over the place is largely going to flower. And so is it very good to eat when it's going to flower? No. Do you want to eat lettuce when it's bolting? Not so much. And so the chickweed, what I really like to do, and this we're going to be doing back at the kitchen, but I think it's super important, is when I make salads out of it, I line up the stems and I cut it super finely. Who's had a chickweed salad where you had to chew forever? Anyone? Yeah. Was that very exciting? No, or not to me anyway. So what I do is I cut it really, really fine, and it makes the whole wild foods experience so much more friendly for people who are a little weirded out by odd foods. And it just makes it more palatable. It allows the flavors of all of the different things to meld in a way that's really lovely. So when we get back to the kitchen, if any of y'all are cutting up the chickweed, I would suggest cutting it super fine. And this is especially important as it starts to get a little bit spindly, because even though I don't usually harvest the part of the plant where the power is not, I would still harvest this chickweed for salad. I would just cut it really, really finely. And yeah, did you want to talk about the redbud?
Sure, but I'd love to just a little more about this chickweed, because this is just like probably top 10 wild edible plants, and we'll also be using this as well as in the salad in a pesto, in a wild greens pesto. And I just always like to once again invoke Frank, and something he taught me was this idea of pesto as a genre rather than an exact recipe. Like pesto can be any green, it can be any nut or seed, and it can be any oil for that matter, although I do tend to use extra virgin olive oil because of the taste there. But it could be cheese or no cheese, and chickweed sunseed pesto is one of the things that really helped me when I was in college, especially trying to save money and not take out any more loans than I had to. Then this was like a staple food for me, and I make it by the gallon, and you can freeze it, you know, and then bring it out periodically. And as well as pesto, use that in like a soup or stew or saute and all sorts of other things, as well as on pasta as you would normally think about it. And the chickweed, it's got this really distinctive flower which is just about done, but there are a few of them that are still open that are these little white flowers that look like little stars. And that's what this was named after at the scientific level. Stellaria is the scientific name for it. And as Natalie's mentioned, it's in the pink family, which at the scientific level is the Caryophyllaceae. So on your list, you would look under C for chickweed. It's in a family that starts with C-A-R-Y. And another way to remember this, because there are some lookalikes to chickweed, in particular something called speedwell or veronica, is that Stella chicks have mohawks. So that line of hairs, I learned that at the Florida Earth Skills Gathering, to invoke the amazing awesomenesses or skills gatherings. And so there's that line of hairs that's like a mohawk. There's the star-like flower, stellar, and then the chick from the chickweed.
Is that other one edible that you mentioned?
You know, I've seen mixed stuff about it, but some people say no, and there's a ton of different species. I don't tend to eat speedwells. I would just leave it probably at that. There's other ways to tell them apart too, and that the speedwell is typically going to have teeth on the edge of the leaf and also be generally hairy versus just the one line of hairs.
I want to talk about one more thing just because it's one of my favorite edibles of the springtime. So do y'all see that tree over there? Anyone?
With the kind of fuchsia type.
Yeah, fuchsia. Redbud, very good. You know what family it's in? It is a legume, which is pretty awesome. So if you were to prune redbud back and plant it in your orchard and then prune it back, what do you think it would do for the trees around it? It would release nitrogen into the soil for those other trees to take up. And it would also be a great thing for you during the springtime. Why? You eat the flower buds. And can you imagine a salad that's made half out of redbud flowers? It's pretty nice. It's very, very nice. And so supposedly the pods are edible too, but I've never found them to be that tasty.
Have you got them when they're young and tender?
Yeah.
I do it, and I don't do it raw, but I would put it like snow
Saute
peas
them.
into
Yeah.
a saute. Yeah.
I guess I'm just a flower girl.
Mm-hmm.
I like the flowers.
Yeah, flowers are choice.
When I'm harvesting red bud flowers is I milk the branch of the flowers. I do a similar thing when I'm harvesting autumn olives, which we'll see an autumn olive down here. And there's a lot of things. So I have spent pretty big chunks of my life making wild foods the primary source of food in my diet. And so when you're doing this, you need to be really efficient with your harvesting because I don't want to wither away. I like being solid. And so I tend to really focus on efficiency with harvesting techniques. So if y'all want to get really into eating wild foods, I would suggest focusing on some of that and just thinking like, I wonder how I could harvest this faster. I wonder how I could get this a little cleaner so I don't have to spend a lot of time back in the kitchen cleaning it up. And so I think having some of that awareness can help make wild food into a significant part of our diet, which I think is really awesome. I think it's also really awesome to just eat one wild food every day. Frank Cook, our teacher, eat something wild every day. Also, eat lots of wild every day. Either way is awesome. So we are going to go to this other place that has a wider variety of wild foods. So let's try to focus on getting over there because it's always hard. We are so excited.